A woman returns to the South African reserve, where she once rescued a dying lion cub only to face the full-grown predator as he charges toward her while the memory of their shared past hangs in the air like a held breath. Won the wound in the grassland day. Young wildlife volunteer named Miriam discovers a barely breathing lion cub during a patrol through the dry grass. The cub is broken, starved, and left behind by its pride. She lifts the cub despite warnings from senior rangers that it won't survive. The land around her seems to hush, as if watching this fragile life tremble in her arms to the fight for life. Miriam spends nights nursing the cub, offering water by hand and staying awake as the cub's heartbeat thins like a fading drum. The camp doubts her efforts, calling it hopeless, but Miriam continues. She names him Amari, meaning strength, though no one believes he will grow to carry the name. The cub responds only to her voice and begins to breathe with steadier rhythm each dawn. 3 bond forged. In dust and dawn as months pass, Amari learns to walk, run, and stalk through imitation of Miriam. She trains him but also teaches him to fear humans, except her wanting him to live wild, free, and untouched. They share silent mornings by the watering hole where he rests his head against her knee, but the reserve board states he must eventually return to the wild, a place where human attachment is dangerous. For the release and the breaking of a heart after endless debates, Amari is released into the reserve. Miriam watches him vanish behind the tall grass, his form swallowed by gold and shadow. She remains listening for a last sound that never comes. Later she leaves the reserve believing she has done all she can for him, yet feeling as though she abandoned a child. 24 years of silence. Miriam builds a new life far away from the savannah, but is haunted by dreams of golden eyes searching for her. News from the reserve is sporadic. She hears only that a solitary male lion rules the Northern Territory, known for his unusual calm near human settlements. She never suspects it is Amari. A letter arrives inviting her to return for the anniversary of the reserve founding, and she reluctantly agrees, feeling a pull she cannot explain. The truck rumbled away, leaving Miriam alone at the edge of the northern sector where the air felt thick with old memories she had tried to bury for decades. Yet the land would not let them rest. She felt it almost immediately, a kind of ancient pulse running through the soil beneath her boots, as though the earth itself knew she had returned and had been waiting for her all this time. The sky above stretched wide and colorless and still, and the heat lay across her shoulders like an unfinished story whispering that nothing here ever truly ends. She walked slowly through the grass, letting her hands drift over the tall, sunburned stalks, each step carrying her deeper into a territory most rangers avoided because the great lion of the north roamed here, a creature spoken about in half jokes and half warnings, a legend who trusted no human and bowed to none. Miriam heard their voices earlier at camp, telling her he was temperamental, unpredictable, and impossibly dominant, too old now to tolerate mistakes and too clever to be fooled by tranquilizers or fences. But she heard something else in their descriptions, a faint thread of familiarity that pulled at her like a soft, unending echo. Miriam paused near a dry riverbed, her eyes scanning the dust for fresh tracks. She spotted them instantly, enormous, heavy impressions pressed into the earth, each one spaced with the long, confident stride of a male in full command of his domain. She knelt beside the nearest print, touching it lightly, and a tremor passed through her, a shiver that rose from her fingertips into her chest, where old memories stirred, awake memories she once forced into silence. But the land would not permit silence. Now, not here, not today. She whispered a name carried only by the wind, Amari, the sound barely leaving her throat, yet vibrating with years of longing and grief, and something deeper, something like hope, although she did not dare admit that even to herself, because the idea felt too fragile, too impossible. Amari would be ancient for a wild lion. 24 years was a lifetime and more. Perhaps he was no longer living. Perhaps these tracks belonged to a descendant, a stranger wearing a familiar shadow. But Miriam felt something stronger than logic. Something that told her the truth lay just beyond the grassline, waiting to step forward. The air grew colder despite the afternoon heat, a change that made the small hairs on her arms stand upright. She lifted her head slowly, sensing the presence before seeing it, and when her eyes finally settled on the tall golden grass ahead, the blades parted with a slow, heavy sway, as though moved by a breath, not by wind, and then he appeared, a massive silhouette rising from the earth itself, a body carved from muscle and age, a mane dark with dust and time, a gaze fierce, unyielding, and roaring with untold history. He stood watching her, unmoving, a statue of life and power, his tail still, his ears forward, one paw paused mid-step, as if even he did not yet know why he had come so close to the human border, as if something older than instinct had guided him. Miriam felt her heart tighten, the world around her shrinking, until only two figures remained, herself and the lion shaped by decades and fate. She did not approach. Instead, she stood as though returning to a moment she had left unfinished long ago. A shout echoed behind her, distant from the rangers ordering her back, telling her to get inside the jeep, telling her she was in danger, but the words slid off her unheard. She took a single slow step forward, her heart thundering yet her body calm, her breath steady with a clarity she had not known for years. The lion lowered his head slightly, his eyes narrowing not in threat but in recognition. or in curiosity, or in the stirring of a memory so old it felt like a dream then. Without warning he moved. The lion launched forward with explosive force, the ground trembling under his weight, grass scattering like frightened birds, dust rising behind him in a great plume. The rangers' voices broke into frantic screams, telling her to run, telling her to move, urging her to choose life over foolish sentiment. But Miriam did not run, she did not even shift her weight. Instead she stood rooted to the earth, her hands hanging gently at her sides, her eyes open and steady as she faced the charging beast with no fear, only a deep, unshakable knowing that whatever lived between them had never died. The lion closed the distance in heartbeats each stride, sending a shockwave through the earth, his mane whipping with the wind rising around him like a dark halo. His roar low and trembling, the ancient sound of power and age and wilderness. But beneath that sound, Miriam heard something else, something she remembered from long ago, from nights spent in a tin shelter nursing a small breathing body that fought for life. She heard the faint echo of a cub calling for comfort in a tongue only the heart understood. When he reached her, the world seemed to split open. He halted with a force that sent dust spiraling around them, his massive head inches from her chest, his breath warm and heavy against her skin, his eyes burning with the wild yet trembling with something softer, something almost fragile. The rangers shouted in disbelief, unable to comprehend why she was still alive, why the lion had not struck, why he now stood motionless, as if caught in a moment he had waited for his whole life. Miriam lowered her hand, slowly, her palm open, steady, unwavering. She touched the top of his head gently, and the lion exhaled a deep shudder that rippled through his entire body. Though land went silent, watching, listening, remembering. The moment stretched on as though the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. With Miriam standing still, her hand resting upon the great lion, and the lion leaning gently into her, as if grounding himself in a memory that had never faded, the rangers watched from afar, unable to step closer for fear of breaking the fragile thread that held the scene in perfect balance. The air shimmered around them, carrying the quiet weight of 24 years bound by a connection no distance and no time could unravel. Maury closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to her knee in a gesture no wild lion should ever make, a gesture born from the first days of his life, when he had been too weak to stand, when she had held him close through the dark hours, whispering strength into his bones. Miriam let her fingers trace the rough, tangled mane, feeling stories etched into each scar, each knot, each strand of time that had passed without her. And yet she sensed that he had never truly forgotten, that somewhere deep in the instinctive roar of his life he had carried one soft memory of the human who had given him a second chance. Lowly she knelt before him, letting the dust settle around her like falling ash, and Amari lowered himself to his massive body, folding into the earth with the careful slowness of an old king returning to a throne he thought had long vanished. His eyes lifted to hers, searching, questioning, remembering, and Miriam felt her heart swell with both joy and sorrow for the years lost, for the fears she had buried, for the quiet truth that the bond between them had endured more fiercely than she had ever dared to imagine. The rangers approached at last, stepping with caution as if entering a sacred space they had not been invited into, their voices hushed with awe and disbelief. The oldest among them whispered that he had never seen anything like it, never witnessed the wild surrender its guard to a human in such a profound and wordless way. Miriam did not answer. She simply rested her forehead against Amaris, knowing that words had no place here, that nothing she could speak would match the ancient language flowing between them, a language older than the reserve, older than memory, older than fear.